sometimes the deepest wounds come not from swords, but from the laughter of those who should protect us. In a world where your worth was measured by your strength and beauty, Alfhild had neither, or so everyone believed. The warriors of Clan Borvik thought they were playing the perfect, cruel joke. They presented this quiet, round maiden to their fiercest warrior, Stig Wolfmane, expecting him to reject her in front of everyone. She was called barren, unwanted, worthless. The crowd waited for the humiliation, for the laughter, for her heart to break completely. But when Stig saw her standing there, trembling and ashamed, something inside this battle-hardened giant shifted. Instead of turning away, he dropped to one knee. Instead of mocking her, he took her hand. What he said next silenced every voice in that hall. But could one moment of unexpected kindness really change everything? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fjord stretched like a silver mirror beneath the morning mist, its waters so still they seemed frozen in time. Along its rocky shores, the longhouses of Clan Borvik stood like weathered sentinels, their timber walls blackened by countless winters and the smoke of forge fires that never died. Here, in this harsh corner of the world where the mountains met the sea, strength was not just admired, it was the only currency that mattered. Stig Wolfmane had been forged in these unforgiving lands like the iron of his ancestors. At 7 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown ox, he moved through the village with the quiet confidence of a man who had never known defeat. His beard, dark as winter storms, was braided with small bones from the enemies he had felled in battle. Scars crisscrossed his arms like a map of every conflict he had survived, each mark a testament to his prowess with blade and axe. But it was his weapon that truly set him apart from other warriors. Ironwill, the legendary battle-axe that had been passed down through 5 generations of Wolfmane warriors, hung at his side like a sleeping dragon. Its steel head, forged from metal that fell from the sky during his great-grandfather's time, gleamed with an otherworldly sheen. The handle, carved from the heartwood of an ancient oak, bore the names of every man who had wielded it in battle. To carry Ironwill was to carry the weight of ancestral expectations, the burden of a bloodline that had never known shame. The men of Borvik feared Stig's silence more than they feared his rage. He spoke little, observed much, and when he did raise Ironwill in battle, it was with the calculated precision of a man who understood that violence was a tool, not a passion. His longhouse, set apart from the others on a rocky outcropping that overlooked the fjord, reflected his solitary nature. No wife warmed his hearth, no children played in his halls. The clan elders had long given up trying to arrange marriages for him. No father wanted to risk his daughter with a man who seemed carved from the very mountains themselves. Yet for all his fearsome reputation, those who watched closely might have noticed something others missed. When the village children scattered at his approach, Stig's eyes held a flicker of sadness. When the women whispered behind their hands about his cold heart, he would turn away, his massive shoulders seeming to carry a weight heavier than any weapon. In the depths of winter, when food grew scarce, mysterious bundles would appear at the doors of the poorest families' venison, dried fish, warm furs, though no one could say from where they came. On the other side of the village, hidden away in the smallest of dwellings like a secret the clan preferred to forget, lived Alfhild, Thorn's daughter. Where Stig inspired awe, Alfhild inspired only pity and often something worse. She was soft where the clan valued hardness, quiet where they prized bold voices, round-faced and full-bodied, in a culture that revered sharp angles and lean strength. But it was the cruel whispers about her womb that cut deepest of all. The clan's wise woman, Greta Ironteeth, had declared Alfhild barren after examining her on her 16th birthday. Her moon blood comes wrong, the crone had announced with the finality of a funeral bell. No seed will grow in that soil. The pronouncement had sealed Alfhild's fate as surely as if she had been cast out into the wilderness. In Clan Borvik, a woman's worth was measured by her ability to bear strong sons, and Alfhild had been found wanting. Her father, Thorns the fisherman, had aged 10 years in the seasons since that pronouncement. Once a man of modest pride who could cast nets with the best of them, he now moved through the village with hunched shoulders and downcast eyes. His wife had died birthing Alfhild, and he had poured all his hopes into his only daughter. The knowledge that his bloodline would end with her had broken something fundamental in his spirit. She was meant to be a boy. He would mutter into his ale when the other fishermen would no longer listen. The gods played a cruel jest, giving me a daughter who cannot even fulfill a woman's purpose. But Alfhild possessed gifts that her clan could not see, talents that their narrow definition of worth had blinded them to. In the small garden behind her father's dwelling, she cultivated herbs with an almost mystical understanding. Plants that withered for others flourished under her careful hands. She knew which roots would ease a child's fever, which leaves could help an old man sleep without pain, which bark could stop a warrior's bleeding when mixed just so with water from a sacred spring. More remarkable still was her gift for languages. While the men of Borvik struggled to comprehend the basic trade tongue of the southern merchants, Alfhild spoke fluently in 4 different dialects. She had learned them by listening, really listening, to the stories of travelers who passed through their village. Where others heard only foreign gibberish, she heard patterns, connections, the beautiful logic that connected all human speech. But perhaps most extraordinary of all was the warmth that radiated from her despite years of cruelty. When the village children fell and skinned their knees, they instinctively ran to Alfhild, not to their own mothers. When the old warriors sat by their fires on cold nights, spinning tales of ancient battles, she was the one who remembered every detail, who could recite their stories back to them word for word, making them feel like the heroes they had once been. Yet none of this mattered in a clan where strength was everything. The young men would dare each other to court her as a joke, laughing as they watched her face light up with hope before delivering some cruel punchline. The women excluded her from their circles, whispered that her barrenness might be contagious. Even the children, influenced by their parents' disdain, would sometimes throw small stones at her as she walked to the well, calling her empty belly and broken woman. The cruelest of these tormentors was Gunnar Stormheart, a warrior whose skill with a sword was matched only by his talent for inflicting emotional wounds. Gunnar had returned from a successful raid 3 moons past, his ship heavy with silver and slaves. In his cups, flush with victory and surrounded by admirers, he had conceived what he believed would be the perfect entertainment. "Our mighty Stig has no wife," he had announced to the gathered warriors in the great hall. "Perhaps it is time we found him one." The suggestion had been met with knowing laughter. Everyone understood the implication. No respectable family would offer their daughter to such an intimidating man, and Stig himself had shown no interest in taking a bride by force, as was his right as a proven warrior. "I know just the maiden," Gunnar had continued, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Young Alfhild would be perfect. After all, if she cannot bear children, Stig need not worry about any little ones underfoot while he prepares for battle." The laughter had grown louder, crueler. The idea had taken root like a poisonous weed, spreading through the village with the speed of wildfire. Wagers were made, plans were hatched. The clan elders, amused by the prospect of such entertainment, had given their blessing to what they saw as an elaborate jest. And so it was that on a crisp morning, when the aurora painted the sky in shades of green and gold, the trap was set. The ceremonial circle of standing stones at the village's heart, a place where justice was dispensed and oaths were sworn, would become the stage for what the clan expected to be their most memorable humiliation. These ancient stones, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, had witnessed countless moments of triumph and shame. They called it the mocking circle, though its original purpose had been far more sacred. Here, according to the oldest stories, the first warriors of Borvik had sworn their oaths of brotherhood. Here, justice had been dispensed with the wisdom of ages. But over time, as the clan had grown harder and more cruel, the circle had become a place of entertainment where the weak were brought to be broken for the amusement of the strong. The stones themselves seemed to disapprove of this transformation. Moss grew thick in their cracks, as if nature itself was trying to heal the wounds that human cruelty had inflicted upon this sacred place. Sometimes, on very quiet nights, the old ones claimed they could still hear the echoes of ancient oaths, the whispered prayers of warriors who had once understood that true strength came not from the ability to break others, but from the wisdom to protect them. As word of the coming spectacle spread, anticipation grew like a fever through the village. This would be more than mere entertainment. This would be a reaffirmation of everything Clan Borvik believed about strength, about worth, about the natural order of their world. They would watch their greatest warrior reject the clan's most worthless member, and in that rejection they would find validation for their own cruelty. None of them suspected that in their eagerness to stage a humiliation, they were actually preparing the ground for a transformation that would shake the very foundations of everything they believed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the mocking circle as the clan gathered for what they believed would be the finest entertainment of the season. Warriors stood with arms crossed, their wives whispered behind cupped hands, and even the children had been brought to witness what promised to be a spectacle worth remembering. The ancient stones seemed to lean inward, as if they too were curious about what would unfold in their sacred embrace. Alfhild stood trembling at the circle's edge, her rough-spun dress doing little to hide her terror. She clutched a small leather pouch to her chest, her healing bag, worn smooth by years of careful handling. Inside were dried willow bark for pain, honey-soaked moss for wounds, and crushed elderberries for fever. These humble herbs represented everything she was, overlooked, dismissed, yet quietly useful to those who took the time to understand. Gunnar Stormheart stood at the center of the circle like a master of ceremonies, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd with theatrical flourish. "Behold," he called out, gesturing toward Alfhild with mock grandeur, "the perfect bride for our mighty Stig Wolfmane. A maiden of rare qualities, she requires no food, for she eats little, needs no protection, for none would take her, and best of all, she will never burden him with squalling children." Cruel laughter rippled through the crowd. Alfhild's cheeks burned with shame, but she held her ground. She had endured worse humiliations than this. What cut deepest was not the mockery itself, but the eager participation of people she had helped, women whose children she had nursed through illness, men whose wounds she had tended in secret. Then Stig appeared, and the laughter died. He moved through the crowd like a force of nature, his massive frame causing even the boldest warriors to step aside. Ironwill hung at his side, its ancient steel catching the morning light in a way that seemed almost alive. His face was unreadable, a mask of stone that revealed nothing of his thoughts. But those who knew him best noticed the subtle signs, the slight tension in his jaw, the way his scarred hands remained loose at his sides rather than clenched in fists. "Here comes our groom," Gunnar announced with a grin. "What say you, Stig? Will you accept this generous gift from your clan brothers?" The circle fell silent. Every eye was fixed on the giant warrior, waiting for his response. Some expected rage, that he would draw Ironwill and end Gunnar's mockery with swift violence. Others anticipated laughter, that he would join in the jest and cast Alfhild aside with some clever insult. A few secretly hoped for simple rejection, quick words that would end her humiliation and send her home to nurse her wounds in private. None of them expected what actually happened. Stig walked directly to Alfhild, his boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. She looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes, expecting the blow that would shatter what remained of her dignity. Instead, he slowly, deliberately, dropped to one knee before her. The silence that followed was so complete that the wind through the standing stones sounded like thunder. "I have fought in 37 battles," Stig said, his deep voice carrying clearly in the stillness. "I have killed men whose names are sung in enemy halls. I have stood alone against overwhelming odds and emerged victorious. But I have never shown half the courage this woman displays simply by standing here, facing your cruelty with her head held high." He reached out and gently took her hand in his massive one. Her fingers, small and work-worn, disappeared entirely within his grasp. "I accept her," he continued, his eyes never leaving her face. "Not as a jest, not as charity, but as my bride. She who tends the sick when none ask her to, she who remembers the stories of old warriors when their own sons have forgotten, she who speaks the tongues of distant lands and grows healing herbs with hands blessed by the gods themselves." Alfhild stared at him in shock. This could not be real. Men like Stig Wolfmane did not kneel before women like her. They did not speak of her small kindnesses as if they were great deeds. They certainly did not claim her as bride before the entire clan. "Rise with me," Stig said softly, his voice meant for her ears alone. "Rise with me, and we will show them what true strength looks like." Together they stood. His hand remained in hers, and she drew strength from his solid presence. For the first time in years, Alfhild did not feel like she was facing the world alone. The clan's reaction was immediate and ugly. Shocked, murmurs turned to angry muttering. This was not how the entertainment was supposed to unfold. Gunnar's face had gone red with fury. His perfect jest had been turned back on him, making him look like a fool before the assembled warriors. "You cannot be serious," Gunnar sputtered. "She is barren, worthless. You mock us all by claiming such a woman." Stig turned toward him with the slow, deliberate movement of a landslide gathering momentum. "I mock no one. I honor a woman who has shown more grace under suffering than you have shown in victory. The wise woman's pronouncement means nothing. I have seen dried streams run again after the spring rains. I have seen barren fields yield harvest when tended with care." He drew himself to his full height, and suddenly the circle seemed small around him. "Any man who questions my choice questions my judgment. Any man who questions my judgment questions my honor. Any man who questions my honor is welcome to settle the matter with steel." The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a forge fire. Every warrior present understood its meaning. Stig was not merely defending his decision, he was claiming Alfhild under his protection. To insult her now would be to insult him, and insulting Stig Wolfmane was a path to the grave. Gunnar's hand moved toward his sword, then stopped. For all his bluster, he was not fool enough to challenge the clan's greatest warrior over what had been meant as mere entertainment. The moment stretched long and tense before he forced a laugh that fooled no one. "Of course," he said with false cheer, "a warrior's choice in brides is his own. May the union bring you joy, Stig Wolfmane." But the damage was done. The clan had been forced to witness something that challenged everything they believed about worth and strength. Some looked thoughtful, beginning to question assumptions they had never examined. Others burned with resentment, angry that their entertainment had been ruined by an act of unexpected nobility. Elder Ragnar, the clan's senior leader, stepped forward to restore order. "If Stig Wolfmane claims this woman as bride, then the matter is settled. Let the wedding feast be prepared for 3 days hence." As the crowd dispersed, many casting confused glances back at the unlikely couple, Alfhild finally found her voice. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" Stig looked down at her, and for a moment his stone mask slipped, revealing something surprisingly vulnerable beneath. "Because I know what it feels like to be alone in a crowd. Because I have watched you tend the sick and comfort the grieving and ask for nothing in return. Because in a clan that values only the strength to destroy, you have shown the far rarer strength to heal." He paused, studying her face. And because, when I looked into your eyes just now, I saw something I had forgotten existed, hope that refuses to die, no matter how much the world tries to kill it. That night, as Alfhild sat in her father's house, trying to comprehend what had happened, she opened her healing pouch and breathed in the familiar scent of dried herbs. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she would become wife to the most feared warrior in the clan. Tomorrow, she would have to prove herself worthy of the faith he had shown in her. For the first time in her life, she was not afraid of tomorrow. The 3 days before the wedding passed like a strange dream where nothing behaved as it should. Where Alfhild had once walked through the village unseen, now every eye followed her. Some gazes held curiosity, others confusion, and more than a few burned with barely concealed resentment. The women who had once excluded her from their circles now whispered furiously among themselves, trying to understand how their mockery had transformed into what appeared to be genuine respect from their greatest warrior. Alfhild found herself clutching her mother's silver wedding comb more tightly each day. It was all she had left of the woman who had died, bringing her into the world a delicate piece of craftsmanship that seemed impossibly fragile in a world built for warriors. The comb's surface was worn smooth from years of handling, its intricate knotwork pattern speaking of a time when beauty was valued alongside strength. Her father had saved it through lean years when they could have traded it for food, understanding somehow that his daughter would need this connection to gentleness when the time came. She bewitched him. Astrid Ironheart declared loudly enough for half the village to hear as Alfhild passed the well. What other explanation could there be? A man like Stig doesn't simply decide to marry a useless girl. Perhaps she slipped something into his drink, suggested Helga Ravencall, whose own attempts to catch Stig's attention had been thoroughly ignored. Everyone knows she dabbles with strange herbs. The accusations stung, but they also revealed something important. The clan could not accept that Stig might have acted from genuine respect. They needed to find some explanation that preserved their worldview, some reason that didn't require them to reconsider their treatment of those they deemed worthless. But not everyone shared this blindness. Old Eric, the storyteller, approached Alfhild as she gathered water, his ancient face creased with something approaching wonder. "I remember your mother," he said quietly. "Ingrid Gentlehands, we called her. She had the same gift you do, the ability to see worth where others see only surface." He leaned heavily on his walking stick, his rheumy eyes studying her face. "She would have been proud to see you, standing tall yesterday, proud to see you choosing hope over bitterness." Alfhild felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't know if I'm choosing anything. This all feels like something happening to someone else. That's the way of it when life takes a sudden turn. But mark my words, girl Stig Wolfmane is no man to act from impulse. If he claimed you as bride, he saw something the rest of us missed. The question now is whether you can see it in yourself." Meanwhile, Stig faced his own challenges. The respect his clan had always shown him remained, but it had taken on a different quality. Where once they had treated him with straightforward fear and admiration, now there was confusion mixed with the awe. Some of the younger warriors looked at him as if he had suddenly sprouted wings or begun speaking in tongues. Bjorn Ironside, Stig's closest friend among the warriors, cornered him at the smithy, where Stig was having new bronze fittings made for his wedding clothes. "I've known you since we were boys pulling nets with our fathers," Bjorn said without preamble. "I've watched you face down berserkers without blinking. So explain to me why you've decided to marry a girl the whole clan considers cursed." Stig continued examining the bronze work, testing the weight of each piece with practiced hands. "When did we become a clan that curses those who are different instead of protecting them?" "Since always," Bjorn replied bluntly. "The weak serve the strong. That's the way of the world." "Is it?" Stig set down the bronze fittings and turned to face his friend. "I've been thinking about the stories old Eric tells. Our ancestors didn't conquer these lands by despising those who were different. They succeeded because they recognized strength in many forms. The strength of the scout who could move unseen, the strength of the healer who could keep warriors fighting, the strength of the wise woman who could read the signs of weather and war. He picked up a piece of raw iron from the smith's bench, holding it up to catch the forge light. This looks like nothing much, doesn't it? Dull, unremarkable, but the smith sees what it could become. He applies heat and pressure not to break it, but to reveal its true nature. Bjorn frowned, not entirely following the analogy. You're saying the girl is like raw iron. I'm saying we've forgotten how to see potential instead of just surface. We've become so focused on immediate, obvious strength that we ignore the deeper kinds that actually hold a clan together. Stig set the iron back down. Alfhild tends the sick when no one asks her to. She remembers the stories that preserve our history. She speaks languages that could open trade routes we've never considered. But because she doesn't swing a sword, we called her worthless. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion from outside, raised voices, and the sound of running feet. Both warriors stepped out of the smithy to find young Leif Bloodaxe, stumbling toward them, his face pale with panic. "Stig!" the boy gasped. "Your bride, someone's hurt her." The words hit Stig like a physical blow. He was running before his mind fully processed what he'd heard, his long legs covering ground with frightening speed. Behind him, Bjorn followed, hand already moving to his weapon. They found Alfhild sitting beside the village well, surrounded by a cluster of concerned women. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and angry red marks on her arm showed where someone had grabbed her roughly. But she was conscious and alert, pressing a cloth to a cut on her cheek while directing one of the other women in treating a deeper wound on old Nora Threadweaver's hand. "What happened?" Stig demanded, dropping to one knee beside Alfhild. "Gunnar," she said simply. "He was drunk, saying things about the wedding, about how you'd been tricked. When Nora defended me, he struck her. I stepped between them." Stig's jaw tightened as he gently examined the marks on her arm. "And then, I reminded him that you had claimed me under your protection." That seemed to sober him up quickly enough. Despite her injuries, there was a note of satisfaction in her voice. He left without another word. "You face down Gunnar Stormheart?" Bjorn asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Alfhild looked up at him, and for a moment her quiet demeanor slipped, revealing something fiercer underneath. "He struck an old woman who was defending me. Did you expect me to simply watch?" Stig felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that went deeper than respect. This woman, dismissed as weak by their entire clan, had stood against a proven warrior to protect someone even more vulnerable than herself. She had not fought with sword or axe, but with something far more dangerous to men like Gunnar, moral courage that refused to yield. "Show me your hands," he said gently. She extended her hands, and he saw what he had missed before scraped. Knuckles that suggested she had not gone down without a fight. His own massive hands engulfed hers as he carefully cleaned the wounds with water from the well. As word of the confrontation spread through the village, the dynamics began to shift again. Some saw Alfhild's defense of old Nora as evidence that she might possess virtues they had overlooked. Others viewed it as dangerous defiance that threatened the established order. The wedding ceremony took place at dawn, as was the ancient custom when joining two souls who had walked different paths. The great hall had been decorated with pine boughs and winter berries, their deep green and blood-red colors, a reminder that even in the harshest season, life endured. At the center of the hall stood the ceremonial marriage stone, a massive granite boulder carved with runic symbols that spoke of binding oaths and shared destinies. Alfhild wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her fuller figure by the kindest of the Khans. Village women. The silver comb held her dark hair in an intricate braid that caught the firelight like captured starshine. Around her neck hung a simple pendant of carved bone. Stig's own work, depicting a wolf and a growing tree intertwined. The symbolism was not lost on those who understood the old ways, the wolf representing protection and loyalty, the tree representing growth and enduring strength. Stig stood before the marriage stone wearing the finest clothes his household possessed, a deep blue tunic that matched his eyes, leather breeches reinforced with silver studs, and a cloak that had belonged to his grandfather. Iron will hung at his side, but for this ceremony its usual menace seemed transformed into something protective, almost ceremonial. Elder Ragnar performed the ancient rites, his weathered voice carrying the weight of countless weddings he had overseen. "Who speaks for this woman?" he intoned, following traditions older than memory. Alfhild's father stepped forward, his face a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. "I, Thorns the fisherman, give my daughter freely to this union. May the gods grant them wisdom to see each other's true worth." Who speaks for this man? To everyone's surprise, it was not one of the warriors who stepped forward, but old Eric, the storyteller. "I speak for Stig Wolfmane, who has shown us that the greatest strength lies not in the ability to conquer, but in the wisdom to recognize what deserves protection." The ceremony proceeded with the traditional exchange of gifts. Stig presented Alfhild with a silver arm ring, its surface inscribed with protective runes that had been blessed by the clan's wise woman. But it was Alfhild's gift to him that truly stunned the assembled witnesses. From the folds of her dress, she drew forth a horn cup, carved from what appeared to be ancient ivory. Its surface was covered in intricate engravings that depicted scenes of great battles, but these were not typical warrior boasts. Instead, they showed moments of mercy, warriors helping fallen enemies, shields raised to protect the innocent, hands extended to lift up those who had stumbled. "Where did you find this?" Stig asked, his voice filled with wonder as he examined the craftsmanship. "I made it," Alfhild replied quietly. "The ivory came from a whale that beached itself 2 summers ago. I've been carving it during the long winter nights, trying to capture what I thought true strength might look like." The cup was passed among the witnesses, and even the most skeptical had to admit its beauty. Here was artistry that rivaled anything produced by the finest craftsmen of distant kingdoms. The carving was not just skilled, it showed a deep understanding of the warrior's code that went beyond surface displays of violence. When the ceremony concluded with the ritual sharing of mead from Alfhild's carved cup, something had fundamentally shifted in the great hall. The clan had witnessed not just a wedding, but a demonstration that their new member possessed talents they had never bothered to discover. The wedding feast that followed proved to be full of small revelations. Alfhild moved through the hall with quiet grace, speaking briefly with each guest in their preferred language, switching from Norse to the trader's tongue to the ancient dialect still spoken by the oldest clan members. She listened to the warriors' stories with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she understood the tactical implications of their battles. Most surprising of all was her interaction with the children. Where adults had learned to fear or dismiss her, the young ones seemed naturally drawn to her warmth. Soon she was surrounded by a cluster of wide-eyed youngsters as she told stories in multiple languages, teaching them words and phrases that made them giggle with delight. "She speaks better trader's tongue than most of our negotiators," observed Ragnar to his fellow elders. "And did you see how she identified the weak point in young Olaf's battle story? The girl understands strategy." But not everyone was pleased with these discoveries. Gunnar Stormheart sat in sullen silence, his pride still stinging from the confrontation by the well. Around him gathered those warriors who felt threatened by the suggestion that strength might have forms they did not possess. "Pretty tricks with words and carvings," muttered Hakon Bloodbear, one of Gunnar's closest allies. "But when winter comes and enemies raid our shores, will her stories stop their axes?" "She stopped yours easily enough," Eric the storyteller observed dryly as he passed their table. "Reminded you of your place with nothing but words about honor and protection." The tension in the hall grew thick enough to taste. Stig, who had been accepting congratulations from well-wishers, noticed the hostile undercurrents and moved to diffuse them before they could escalate. "My friends," he called out, his voice carrying easily over the feast noise. "Today marks not just my wedding, but a reminder of something we have forgotten. Our ancestors conquered these lands, not through strength alone, but by recognizing and nurturing all forms of useful talent. The scout, the healer, the wise woman, the smith, all were valued because all contributed to the clan's survival." He raised the horn cup Alfhild had given him, its ivory surface gleaming in the firelight. "Look closely at this cup. See how it shows strength, protecting rather than simply destroying. This is not weakness. This is the strength that builds something lasting instead of just leaving ruins behind." The hall fell silent as his words sank in. Some nodded thoughtfully, beginning to understand the deeper implications of what he was suggesting. Others remained skeptical, unwilling to abandon beliefs that had shaped their entire understanding of the world. As the evening progressed, small but significant changes became apparent. Women, who had once shunned Alfhild, began seeking her out, curious about her herb knowledge and language skills. Young warriors found themselves thinking about her carved cup, wondering if there might be honor in protection as well as conquest. But perhaps the most important transformation was in Alfhild herself. For the first time in her life, she was not trying to make herself smaller, quieter, less noticeable. She was beginning to understand that her gifts had value, that her gentleness was not weakness but a different kind of strength altogether. When the last guest had departed and the great hall lay empty, except for scattered rushes and the dying embers of the feast fire, Alfhild and Stig stood together beside the marriage stone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that their union was more than just an elaborate act of charity. But tonight, for the first time in either of their lives, neither of them felt alone. The first test of their marriage came with the arrival of spring and a ship bearing black sails on the fjord's horizon. The vessel belonged to Jarl Magnus Ironbeard, a neighboring chieftain known for his cruel humor and his talent for finding weakness in rival clans. His unexpected visit sent ripples of tension through Borvik as warriors hastily donned their finest gear and Elder Ragnar prepared to receive a guest who might prove to be either ally or enemy. Magnus brought with him 20 of his finest warriors and a proposition that made the clan elders exchange worried glances. He had heard rumors, he explained with a smile that never touched his cold eyes, of strange happenings in Borvik. Stories of their greatest warrior taking a worthless woman as bride, of ancient customs being challenged by soft-hearted foolishness. "I come to see for myself whether these tales are true," Magnus announced in the great hall, his voice carrying the subtle threat of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "And to offer assistance if your clan has fallen under some unfortunate enchantment." What made his words particularly dangerous was the carved wooden chess set he carried, an ornate creation with pieces depicting various types of people, kings and queens, warriors and peasants, all carved with exquisite detail. It was more than a game. It was Magnus's way of demonstrating his understanding of hierarchy, his belief that people existed to serve specific roles and should never step outside their designated places. Stig sat beside Alfhild at the high table, acutely aware that every eye in the hall was measuring their reaction. Magnus's challenge was clear. He was testing whether the fearsome Stig Wolfmane had truly been weakened by marriage to an unsuitable woman, or whether there was some deeper strategy at work. "You are welcome to see whatever you wish," Stig replied evenly. "My wife and I have nothing to hide." Magnus's laugh was like ice cracking on a frozen pond. "Your wife, is it? I confess, I am curious to meet this legendary woman who could tame the great Stig Wolfmane." His gaze settled on Alfhild with predatory interest. "She seems quiet. Perhaps she would prefer the women's quarters while the men discuss important matters?" It was a deliberate insult, an attempt to force Alfhild back into the diminished role the clan had traditionally assigned her. But something had changed in the months since the wedding. Alfhild no longer flinched from confrontation. Instead, she studied Magnus with the same careful attention she had once reserved for her herbs. "I find men's conversations quite educational," she replied calmly, "particularly when they reveal so much about the speakers." Magnus's eyes sharpened. "Indeed. And what does my conversation reveal about me?" "That you are a man who believes strength comes from keeping others small." Alfhild's voice remained gentle, but her words carried unexpected steel. "You test people not to discover their true nature, but to confirm your own prejudices. Your chess set is beautiful, but it reveals a mind that sees all relationships as games to be won rather than bonds to be honored." The hall fell silent. No one spoke to Jarl Magnus in such a manner, certainly not women, and definitely not women whose worth was still being questioned by their own clan. Yet Alfhild had done so without raising her voice, without showing anger, simply stating observations as if discussing the weather. Magnus's face darkened, but before he could respond, old Eric the storyteller stepped forward with perfect timing. "Perhaps our guests would enjoy hearing the tale of how the gods themselves once appeared as humble travelers, testing the hospitality of mortals. It seems fitting for the occasion." The storyteller's intervention provided a face-saving distraction, but the damage was done. Magnus had expected to find a broken warrior married to a cowering woman. Instead, he had encountered a partnership that challenged his fundamental tuau, assumptions about power and worth. Over the following days, Magnus and his warriors remained as guests, watching and testing. They proposed contests of strength, which Stig won handily. They suggested hunting expeditions, where Stig's skill with bow and spear proved undiminished. They even arranged mock battles, hoping to find evidence that marriage had softened the great warrior's edge. But it was during these tests that Alfhild's true influence became apparent. When Magnus's warriors complained of stomach ailments from unfamiliar food, she quietly provided remedies that eased their discomfort. When one of his men injured himself showing off during a weapons display, she tended his wound with such skill that it healed cleanly, without festering. Most significantly, she began to demonstrate her gift for strategy. During discussions of clan politics and trade relationships, her questions revealed perspectives that the warriors had never considered. She pointed out weaknesses in defensive positions, suggested alternative routes for trading expeditions, and identified potential allies among groups that the clan had previously ignored. "Your wife has an interesting mind," Magnus observed to Stig during a private conversation by the fjord's edge. "She sees patterns that escape most warriors. She sees people as they truly are," Stig replied. "Not as she wishes them to be or fears they might become, but as they actually are. It's a rare gift." Magnus studied the horizon where his black-sailed ship waited at anchor. Such gifts can be dangerous. Women who think too much sometimes inspire others to question what should not be questioned. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Magnus was suggesting that Alfhild's influence might spread beyond Borvik, challenging the established order in ways that powerful men would find unacceptable. That evening, as Magnus's visit neared its end, he issued a final challenge. He proposed a formal contest, not of physical strength, but of wisdom. His chess set would serve as the battlefield, with himself facing whatever opponent Borvik chose to represent them. "Surely your greatest warrior would not decline such a simple challenge?" Magnus asked with false courtesy. The trap was obvious to everyone present. If Stig accepted and lost, it would suggest that his judgment had been compromised by his marriage. If he declined, it would imply cowardice or weakness. But if he won too easily, it might seem like Magnus had never posed a real threat. Before Stig could respond, Alfhild spoke quietly from her seat beside him. "I would be honored to accept Jarl Magnus's challenge." The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. Women did not engage in formal contests with visiting chieftains. It was simply not done. Magnus's smile was predatory. How delightful! I had hoped for this opportunity to test the wisdom that has supposedly transformed your clan's perspective. As the ornate chess set was prepared, the stakes became clear to everyone present. This was not merely a game, but a battle for the very soul of Clan Borvik's evolving identity. The chess match began at sunset, with the great hall transformed into an arena of intellectual combat. Torches cast dancing shadows across the carved pieces as Magnus arranged his forces with the confidence of a man who had never lost such a contest. His wooden army gleamed with oil and care, kings proud and imperious, queens relegated to defensive positions, warriors dominant in the front lines, and peasants serving as expendable shields. Alfhild sat across from him, her hands folded calmly in her lap as she studied not just the board, but Magnus himself. She had learned much about reading people during her years of quiet observation, and she could see the patterns in his play before he even made his first move. He was a man who believed in overwhelming force, in using superior numbers to crush opposition, in maintaining rigid control over every element of his strategy. "The rules are simple," Magnus announced, for the benefit of the watching crowd. "We play until one of us achieves victory. No quarter given, no mercy shown." He gestured to his pieces with proprietary pride. "I carved these myself, each one representing the natural order of things. Kings command, warriors fight, peasants serve. When each piece knows its place, harmony prevails." Alfhild nodded thoughtfully, her fingers lightly touching her own pieces, simpler carvings, but somehow more alive in their imperfection. "Your craftsmanship is indeed remarkable. Each piece perfectly represents how you see the world." "And how is that?" Magnus asked, making his opening move with a peasant pawn. "As a place where some people matter more than others." Alfhild moved her own pawn forward, but it was not a mirror of his aggressive opening. Instead, she chose a quieter development that seemed to invite him deeper into the center of the board. The game proceeded with Magnus, displaying the flashy tactics that had won him victories across many halls. He advanced his warriors boldly, sacrificed his peasants without thought, and maneuvered his king to what appeared to be an unassailable position. The watching crowd murmured appreciation for his obvious skill. This was chess as they understood it, with clear hierarchies and decisive action. But as the moves accumulated, something strange began to happen. Alfhild's pieces, which had seemed scattered and defensive, began to reveal hidden connections. Her peasant pawns, dismissed by Magnus as negligible threats, had advanced quietly to control key squares. Her warriors, which had appeared to be retreating, were actually coordinating a complex web of mutual support. "Interesting approach," Magnus observed, his confidence beginning to show the first hairline cracks. "You play like someone who has never learned proper strategy." "I play like someone who has learned to see value where others see only weakness," Alfhild replied, making a move that seemed almost irrelevant until Magnus realized it had quietly undermined his entire position. In the watching crowd, understanding began to dawn among the more perceptive observers. Alfhild was not just playing chess, she was demonstrating a completely different philosophy of strength. Where Magnus saw pieces as tools to be used and discarded, she saw them as individuals whose unique capabilities could be coordinated for mutual benefit. Stig watched with growing admiration as his wife dismantled Magnus's seemingly superior position through a series of moves that seemed modest individually but created devastating cumulative pressure. She was teaching the entire hall a lesson about the difference between authority and leadership, between commanding and inspiring. "Your queen seems remarkably active," Magnus noted with growing irritation, as Alfhild's most powerful piece wove through his defenses like water flowing around stones. "Most unusual for a woman to use the queen so aggressively. Perhaps because most men cannot imagine a world where queens are valued for their abilities rather than their willingness to stay safely in the back row," Alfhild observed mildly, her queen capturing one of his key warriors in a move he had not seen coming. The turning point came when Magnus, frustrated by his deteriorating position, attempted a desperate attack against Alfhild's king. It was the kind of all-or-nothing assault that had intimidated lesser opponents into making crucial mistakes. But Alfhild had been anticipating this moment from the game's beginning. Her response was not a frantic defense, but a quiet counter-attack that used Magnus's own aggression against him. His advanced pieces, cut off from support and surrounded by what he had dismissed as harmless peasants, found themselves trapped and systematically eliminated. Within 6 moves, his proud army lay in ruins, while Alfhild's king stood secure behind a wall of coordinated defenders. "Impossible," Magnus muttered, staring at the board as if it had betrayed him. "I had the superior position. My pieces were stronger, my strategy more aggressive." "Your pieces were isolated," Alfhild explained gently, "each one fighting alone, trusting only in its individual strength. Mine learned to work together, to protect each other, to find strength through connection rather than dominance." She gestured to the carved peasant pawns that had played such a crucial role in the victory. "You dismissed these as expendable, but they became the foundation that everything else was built upon. When you value only the obviously powerful, you blind yourself to the sources of real strength." The hall had fallen completely silent during the final moves, and now the silence stretched longer as the implications sank in. Magnus Ironbeard, the feared chieftain who had never lost a contest of strategy, had been defeated by a woman most of his own clan had considered worthless only months before. Magnus's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally a grudging respect that he could not entirely hide. "You play unlike anyone I have encountered. Where did you learn such tactics?" "From watching how people actually behave when they think no one important is paying attention," Alfhild replied. "From seeing how the supposed weakest members of our clan are often the ones who hold everything together. From learning that true strength comes not from being feared, but from being trusted." As Magnus prepared to depart the following morning, his demeanor had changed subtly. The predatory confidence had been replaced by something more thoughtful, more uncertain. His encounter with Alfhild had forced him to confront the possibility that his entire worldview might be built on flawed assumptions. "You have given me much to consider," he told Stig as his warriors loaded their ship. "Your wife is indeed remarkable. I wonder if I have been too quick to dismiss those I considered beneath notice in my own lands." But his parting words carried a warning as well as acknowledgement. "Others will not be so easily convinced. There are chieftains who would see her wisdom as a threat to the natural order. Be careful that your revolution does not attract the wrong kind of attention." As the black-sailed ship disappeared beyond the fjord's mouth, Alfhild stood beside Stig, watching the waters return to their peaceful stillness. The chess match had been more than a victory. It had been a declaration that change was not only possible but inevitable. The question now was whether they were strong enough to weather the storms that such change would surely bring. Summer brought prosperity to Clan Borvik, unlike any they had known in living memory. Alfhild's influence had begun to transform their approach to trade and diplomacy, while her herb gardens yielded medicines that commanded premium prices from distant merchants. The clan's reputation for wisdom was influence, spreading as far as their old reputation for warfare, bringing new opportunities and unexpected allies. But it was during the harvest festival, as the clan celebrated their good fortune beneath a sky painted gold by the setting sun, that everything changed. Alfhild had been feeling unwell for several days, nothing serious, she assured everyone, just the lingering effects of a stomach ailment that had afflicted several villagers. She continued her daily routines, tending her gardens and helping prepare for the feast, though those who knew her well noticed she moved more slowly and paused frequently to rest. The revelation came as she was arranging the ceremonial fertility wreaths that would bless the harvest celebration. Greta Ironteeth, the clan's wise woman, approached with the measured steps of someone bearing momentous news. In her gnarled hands, she carried a small clay vessel, an ancient birthing cup that had been passed down through generations of clan mothers. "Child," Greta said, her voice softer than anyone had heard it in years, "I need to speak with you privately." They withdrew to Greta's dwelling, where bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters like promises of hidden knowledge. The wise woman's examination was thorough and gentle, her experienced hands reading signs that Alfhild herself had not yet recognized. When it was finished, Greta sat back with an expression of wonder that transformed her weathered features. 43 years I have been reading the signs of life," she whispered. 43 years, and I have never been so wrong about anything as I was about you." She lifted the birthing cup with trembling hands. "You carry a child, Alfhild Wolfmane, strong and healthy, by all the signs I can read." Alfhild stared at the cup as if it might hold answers to questions she had not known how to ask. For years, she had accepted the pronouncement of barrenness as unalterable fact. She had built her identity around being the woman who could never fulfill what her clan saw as a woman's primary purpose. Now, in an instant, everything had changed. "But you said," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I said what I believed to be true based on signs I thought I understood." Greta interrupted, setting the cup aside and taking Alfhild's hands in her own. "But I was reading your body through the lens of our clan's narrow understanding of what normal should look like. You were never barren, child. You were simply waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances, the right partner." The implications crashed over Alfhild like cold fjord water. If she had never been barren, then the foundation of her entire identity had been built on false assumptions. The cruelty she had endured, the mockery she had accepted, the self-doubt that had shaped her understanding of her own worth, all of it had been based on a misdiagnosis from a wise woman who had never encountered someone whose body worked differently than expected. "Does this mean—" Alfhild's voice caught as the full scope of the revelation sank in. "Does this mean that all those years of believing I was worthless, all those times I accepted their judgment? It means that our clan has been blind," Greta said firmly. "Blind to your true nature, blind to the signs we should have recognized, blind to the possibility that our understanding might be incomplete." She paused, studying Alfhild's face with new eyes. "But perhaps that blindness served a purpose. Perhaps you needed those years of adversity to develop the strength and wisdom that now makes you the remarkable woman you have become." As Alfhild walked back to the harvest festival, her mind reeled with the implications of this discovery. The child growing within her was proof that everything the clan had believed about her was wrong. But more than that, it raised uncomfortable questions about how many others might have been dismissed or diminished based on equally flawed assumptions. She found Stig supervising the arrangement of tables for the feast, his massive frame dwarfing the other men as he lifted benches that would normally require 2 people. When he saw her approaching, his face lit with the genuine pleasure that had become characteristic of their interactions. But his expression quickly shifted to concern as he noticed something different in her demeanor. "What troubles you?" he asked, setting down the bench and giving her his full attention. She drew him aside, away from the bustling preparations, to a quiet spot overlooking the fjord. The birthing cup felt impossibly heavy in her hands as she struggled to find words for what she had learned. "Greta has given me news," she said finally. "News that changes everything we thought we knew." She told him about the examination, about the child, about the wise woman's admission that her original diagnosis had been wrong. As she spoke, she watched Stig's face cycle through surprise, joy, and excitation. Finally, a deep anger that made his jaw clench and his hands curl into fists. "You were never barren," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "All these years, all the cruelty you endured, all the times you were made to feel worthless, it was all based on a lie." "Not a lie," Alfhild said quickly. "A mistake." Greta was working with the knowledge she had, making judgments based on what she thought she understood. But yes, all of it was wrong. Stig was silent for a long moment, staring out at the water where the harvest moon was beginning to rise. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of a man reassessing everything he thought he knew about justice and truth. If they were wrong about you, how many others have they been wrong about? How many people have we dismissed or diminished because they did not fit our narrow understanding of what was valuable? It was the question that would haunt them both in the days to come. Alfhild's pregnancy was not just a personal miracle. It was evidence that the clan's entire system of judging worth might be fundamentally flawed. If the wise woman could be so completely wrong about something as basic as fertility, what other judgments might be equally mistaken? "There's something else," Alfhild said, her voice growing stronger as she worked through the implications. "If I was never barren, then Stig's decision to marry me was not the act of charity everyone assumed it to be. You chose me not despite my supposed flaws, but because you saw something real that others missed." Stig turned to look at her, and for the first time since she had known him, his stone mask slipped completely. What she saw underneath was not the fearsome warrior the clan revered, but a man who had spent his entire life feeling isolated by his own strength, searching for someone who could see past his reputation to the person beneath. "I chose you because in a clan full of people trying to prove their worth through dominance, you were Guy, the only one who seemed to understand that true strength comes from lifting others up," he said. "I chose you because when I looked in your eyes, I saw someone who had been broken by the world, but refused to let that breaking make her cruel." As they stood together watching the moon rise over the fjord, both of them understood that they had reached a turning point. The child growing in Alfhild's womb would be born into a world that was questioning its most fundamental assumptions about worth and strength. But with that questioning would come resistance from those who had built their power on the old ways. The harvest festival continued around them, but something had fundamentally shifted. The couple who had been seen as an unlikely pairing now represented something far more dangerous to the established order they were living. Proof that the clan's entire understanding of value and worth might need to be reconsidered. From the ground up, word of Alfhild's pregnancy spread through the village like wildfire, carrying with it implications that set the clan buzzing with excitement, confusion, and in some quarters, dangerous resentment. The news that their barren woman was with child forced everyone to confront an uncomfortable truth. If Greta Ironteeth had been so fundamentally wrong about something so basic, what else might the clan's traditional wisdom have gotten wrong? The celebration was not universal. In the shadows of the Great Hall, Gunnar Stormheart gathered his most loyal followers around him, like ravens circling carrion. His handsome face, scarred by countless battles, was twisted with the kind of fury that comes when a man's worldview is threatened at its foundation. "Do you see what this means?" he hissed to his companions, his voice low but venomous. "Everything we have built our lives upon the idea that strength recognizes strength, that the weak serve the strong, that natural order must be preserved. All of it is being undermined by this woman's womb." Hakon Bloodbear, his closest ally, nodded grimly. "If she can bear children after being declared barren, then every judgment we have made about worth and value comes into question. The young warriors are already talking, wondering if perhaps they should reconsider their treatment of those they deemed inferior." "And worse," added Thorvald Grimface, a scarred veteran whose cruelty was legendary even among warriors. "She has turned Stig into something he was never meant to be. The man who once struck fear into the hearts of our enemies now speaks of protecting the weak instead of crushing them. He defends herb-gathering women instead of leading raids for glory and plunder." As Alfhild's pregnancy progressed, these divisions within the clan deepened like cracks in winter ice. The upcoming winter solstice celebration, traditionally the clan's most important gathering, had become a focal point for the growing tension. It was during this ceremony that major decisions were made. Leadership was confirmed, and the clan's direction for the coming year was established. Alfhild, now showing clear signs of her condition, had taken to carrying a new artifact that would prove crucial in the coming confrontation. It was a wool-wrapped bundle containing what appeared to be an ordinary collection of wooden tablets, but these were far more significant than they seemed. She had been secretly carving them throughout her pregnancy, each one inscribed with the name and accomplishments of someone the clan had dismissed or overlooked. There was Nils the Lame, whose twisted leg had led to his exclusion from warrior training, but whose mind for numbers had quietly prevented the clan from making several disastrous trade agreements. Ingrid Softvoice, whose stutter made her the target of mockery, but whose gift for reading weather patterns had saved countless fishing expeditions from deadly storms. Old Henrik Slowhand, dismissed as useless due to his age, but whose knowledge of distant lands had opened new trade routes that brought prosperity. Each tablet told the story of hidden strength, overlooked wisdom, dismissed potential. Together, they formed what Alfhild privately called her truth stones, evidence that the clan's traditional methods of evaluating worth were not just flawed, but actively destructive to their own prosperity and survival. Stig, meanwhile, was facing pressure from multiple directions. Elder Ragnar had taken him aside several times, warning him that his protection of Alfhild was creating dangerous divisions within the clan. Some of the older warriors were beginning to question whether his marriage had somehow compromised his judgment, making him unfit for the leadership role they had always assumed he would eventually claim. "I do not question your skill with weapons," Ragnar said during one of these conversations, his weathered face grave with concern. "But leadership requires more than the ability to win battles. It requires the wisdom to maintain unity, to preserve the traditions that have kept us strong for generations. And if those traditions are built on cruelty and ignorance," Stig replied, his massive hands carefully sharpening Ironwill's ancient blade, "if our strength comes from breaking down those who could make us stronger, what kind of leadership preserves destructive traditions simply because they are old?" The old man's face darkened. Dangerous words, Stig Wolfmane. The kind of words that split clans and leave them vulnerable to enemies who understand the value of unquestioned loyalty. But it was not just internal pressure that Stig faced. Reports had begun arriving of external threats, gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. Magnus Ironbeard had not been the only chieftain to hear stories of Borvik's unusual transformation. Other leaders, some more hostile than curious, were beginning to take notice of a clan where traditional hierarchies were being questioned and women were gaining unprecedented influence. Most concerning of all were the reports about Jarl Erik Bloodaxe, a notorious warlord whose raids had devastated coastal settlements from the Orkney Islands to the Irish coast. Unlike Magnus, who had come seeking to understand, Erik was reportedly gathering allies for what he saw as a necessary correction to dangerous ideas that might spread if left unchecked. "He sees our clan as a disease that must be burned out before it infects others," reported Bjorn Ironside, who had just returned from a trading expedition where he had gathered intelligence about the growing threat. "He speaks of Alfhild as a witch who has bewitched our warriors and turned them soft. He claims that allowing such influence to continue would be a betrayal of everything our people stand for." The approaching winter solstice ceremony had taken on an ominous significance. It would be more than a celebration, it would be a reckoning that would determine whether the clan would embrace the changes that Alfhild and Stig represented, or reject them in favor of the old ways that promised familiar certainties. As the longest night of the year approached, preparations took on a frantic quality. The great hall was decorated with more elaborate care than anyone could remember, as if the clan was trying to prove something to themselves about their continuing strength and prosperity. The traditional ceremonies were planned with meticulous attention to ancient protocols, while whispered conversations in dark corners grew more urgent and more divisive. Alfhild, now heavy with child, but still moving with the quiet grace that had always marked her actions, spent her days in careful preparation for what she sensed would be a crucial confrontation. Her truth stones were complete, each one carefully carved and verified through conversations with the people whose stories they told. She had also been working on something else, a speech that would either bridge the growing divide in the clan or make it irreparable. The night before the ceremony, as snow began to fall in thick, silent flakes that muffled sound and blurred the boundaries between earth and sky, Alfhild and Stig sat together beside their hearth. The fire crackled with warmth that seemed to push back against more than just the physical cold outside. "Tomorrow will determine everything," Alfhild said, one hand resting on her swollen belly where the child moved restlessly, as if sensing the tension that filled the air. "Either we prove that change and tradition can coexist, or we discover that some divisions cannot be healed." Stig looked up from where he was making final adjustments to his ceremonial gear, not the battle-scarred leather he wore for raids, but the finest clothing his household possessed, adorned with silver clasps that had belonged to his ancestors. "Are you ready for what may come?" "I've been ready my whole life," Alfhild replied, her voice carrying a strength that would have surprised those who remembered the frightened girl who had once stood trembling in the mocking circle. "The question is whether the clan is ready to discover what they could become if they stopped being afraid of their own potential." Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the longhouses like the voices of ancient spirits bearing witness to the approaching moment when everything would change. The winter solstice was coming, and with it, a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of two individuals who had dared to challenge tradition, but the very soul of a clan caught between its past and its possible future. In the morning, they would discover whether love and wisdom could triumph over fear and tradition, or whether some barriers were simply too strong to overcome. The truth stones waited, ready to reveal secrets that might heal the clan or split it apart forever. The winter solstice ceremony began before dawn, as tradition demanded, with the lighting of the great fire that would burn throughout the longest night. The flames leaped high into the dark sky, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the assembled clan members, who stood in a circle around the sacred flame. The air was thick with more than just smoke. Tension crackled like electricity before a storm. Elder Ragnar stepped forward, his ceremonial staff topped with ancient bronze, catching the firelight as he began the ritual words that had opened this ceremony for countless generations. But even as he spoke the familiar phrases about strength and tradition, honor and loyalty, everyone present could sense that this night would be unlike any other in the clan's history. "We gather as our ancestors gathered," Ragnar intoned, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "To mark the turning of the year, to remember who we are, and to decide who we shall become." Those last words seemed to hang in the frigid air like a challenge. Normally, the ceremony was about reaffirming established truths, not questioning them. But tonight, with Alfhild standing visibly pregnant beside Stig, with the clan split between those who had begun to embrace change and those who clung to the old ways, every word carried deeper meaning. The first part of the ceremony proceeded according to ancient custom. Warriors stepped forward to recite their deeds from the past year, trading expeditions were celebrated, and the clan's prosperity was acknowledged. But when the time came for the traditional affirmation of the clan's values and beliefs, something unprecedented happened. Gunnar Stormheart strode into the circle, his hand resting on his sword hilt in a gesture that was not quite threatening, but was certainly meant to be noticed. His voice, when he spoke, carried the confidence of a man who believed he was defending everything sacred and necessary. "Brothers and sisters of Clan Borvik," he began, his words precise and carefully chosen. "We have prospered this year, it is true. But we must ask ourselves whether this prosperity has come at too great a cost. Have we maintained the strength that made us who we are, or have we allowed ourselves to be weakened by soft words and softer thinking?" His gaze found Alfhild across the flames, and his meaning was unmistakable. Some among us would have us believe that the weak should be elevated above the strong, that traditional wisdom should be cast aside in favor of untested ideas. But what happens to a clan that forgets the harsh truths that have kept it alive for generations? A murmur rippled through the crowd, some nodding agreement with Gunnar's words, others shifting uncomfortably as they recognized the challenge he was issuing. This was no longer just a ceremony, it was a confrontation that would determine the clan's future direction. Before anyone else could respond, Alfhild stepped forward. The firelight played across her face, highlighting the determination that had replaced the fear. She had once worn like armor. In her hands, she carried the wool-wrapped bundle containing her truth stones, though few recognized their significance yet. Gunnar speaks of strength and weakness as if they were simple things, easily recognized and forever fixed, she said, her voice calm but carrying clearly in the cold night air. But what if our understanding of these concepts has been too narrow? What if we have been calling some things weakness that are actually different forms of strength? She unwrapped the bundle, revealing the carved wooden tablets that gleamed in the firelight like promises waiting to be fulfilled. I have spent the months of my pregnancy doing something our clan has rarely bothered with, truly seeing the people we have dismissed and overlooked. These stones tell their stories. One by one, she began to present the tablets, each one a revelation that challenged the crowd's assumptions. She spoke of Nils the Lame's mathematical genius that had prevented ruinous trade deals, of Ingrid Softvoice's weather-reading abilities that had saved lives, of old Henrik's geographical knowledge that had opened profitable new routes. Each person whose story is carved here was called weak, useless, burdensome, Alfhild continued, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. Yet each one contributed more to our clan's prosperity and survival than many who are praised as strong. We have been blind to our own resources, deaf to our own wisdom. Gunnar's face darkened as he realized what she was doing. Pretty words and careful examples, he snarled. But words do not stop enemy raiders. Cleverness does not win battles when steel meets steel. You would make us a clan of scribes and herb-gatherers, forgetting that this world respects only the strength to take what you want and hold what you have. The confrontation was escalating exactly as both sides had feared and expected. The clan was being forced to choose between two fundamentally different visions of what strength meant, what survival required, what kind of people they wanted to be. Stig had remained silent during the initial exchanges, but now he stepped forward, Iron Will hanging at his side like a reminder of all the battles he had won through traditional strength. When he spoke, every person present leaned forward to hear his words, understanding that his voice might tip the balance one way or the other. "Both of you speak truth," he said quietly, his words carrying the authority of a man who had never been defeated in battle. "But you speak only part of the truth." Stig's words hung in the frigid air as he slowly drew Iron Will from its sheath. The ancient blade caught the firelight like captured lightning, and every person in the circle held their breath. This was the moment that would define everything. Would the clan's greatest warrior side with tradition or transformation? Gunnar speaks truth when he says, "This world can be harsh and cruel," Stig continued, holding the legendary weapon before him. "I have seen what happens to clans that cannot defend themselves. I have walked through villages where weakness was rewarded with death and slavery." His voice carried the weight of hard-won experience. But Alfhild also speaks truth when she says, "We have been blind to our own strength." He turned the blade, letting the firelight play along its ancient steel. "This axe has been passed down through 5 generations of Wolfman warriors. Each man who carried it believed that strength meant the ability to destroy enemies. But I have learned something that none of my ancestors understood." With deliberate ceremony, he placed Iron Will on the ground between Gunnar and Alfhild, the blade forming a line that seemed to divide more than just physical space. True strength is not choosing between destruction and creation. It is knowing when each is needed and having the wisdom to use both in service of something greater than yourself. His gaze swept across the assembled clan members. A warrior who can only destroy is a tool. A warrior who can protect, nurture, and build, while still being capable of necessary violence, that is a leader. Gunnar's face twisted with frustration. Fine words, but the world will not change to accommodate our newfound gentleness. Even now, Jarl Erik Bloodaxe gathers his forces against us. He sees our clan's transformation as weakness to be exploited. Will your wife's herb gardens stop his ships? Will her carved stones turn aside his warriors' blades? No, Stig admitted readily. But neither will blind adherence to the old ways. Erik comes, not because we have grown weak, but because we have begun to grow strong in ways that threaten his worldview. He fears that our example might inspire others to question whether his brand of strength is the only path to survival. Alfhild stepped closer to the sacred fire, her truth stones clutched against her chest like a shield made of hope. Jarl, Erik represents everything we have learned to reject the belief that worth comes only from the ability to dominate others, that strength means crushing anything different, that change is always a threat to be destroyed rather than an opportunity to grow stronger. She began placing the carved tablets around the base of the sacred fire, each one a small act of defiance against centuries of narrow thinking. These stones tell the stories of people who made our clan stronger through gifts that traditional warrior culture dismissed. But more than that, they represent everyone we have failed to see, failed to value, failed to protect. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, the firelight playing across her face like a glimpse of some inner flame that had always burned, but was only now being allowed to shine. If we reject these truths now, if we choose fear over wisdom, then we become exactly what Erik claims. We already are a clan that has lost its way, forgotten its purpose, betrayed its own potential. Old Erik the storyteller stepped forward from the crowd, his ancient face grave with the weight of years and memory. I have lived long enough to see many changes come and go. Some brought prosperity, others brought ruin. But I have never seen change that offered as much promise as what Stig and Alfhild represent. His voice, though aged, carried clearly in the still night air. The old ways served us well when the world was simpler, when strength could be measured only in steel and blood. But the world has grown more complex. To survive and prosper, we must grow more complex as well. Gunnar's hand moved to his sword, and the tension in the circle ratcheted higher. You speak of complexity as if it were virtue. Some truths are simple, old man. The strong survive, the weak perish. Those who forget this lesson learn it again through suffering. And yet, Alfhild said quietly, the child growing in my womb proves that even your simple truths can be wrong. You called me barren, worthless, a burden to be mocked. Now I carry new life that will inherit whatever world we choose to build tonight. She placed the last of her truth stones around the fire, completing a circle that seemed to embrace the sacred flame with stories of hidden worth and overlooked strength. This child will grow up in a clan that either learned to see all forms of strength or one that remained blind to its own potential. Which legacy do we choose to leave? The moment balanced on a knife's edge, the clan stood divided, faced with a choice that would determine not just their immediate future, but the kind of people they would become. The sacred fire burned higher, as if the very elements were holding their breath to see which path would be chosen. In the distance, carried on the winter wind, came the faint sound of war horns, Jarl Erik's fleet approaching through the darkness, drawn by reports of a clan that had forgotten the harsh truths of survival. The Tuckvound. External threat was no longer a distant possibility, but an immediate reality that would test every choice they made in the next few moments. The war horns grew louder, their haunting calls echoing across the fjord like the voices of ancient spirits demanding judgment. But instead of causing panic, the approaching threat seemed to crystallize something in the hearts of Clan Borvik's members. As one, they turned not toward their weapons, but toward the sacred fire, where Alfhild's truth stones gleamed like small beacons of hope. Elder Ragnar stepped forward, his ceremonial staff trembling slightly in his aged hands. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a decision that had been building in his heart throughout the long night's revelations. "I have lived 73 winters," he said, his words cutting through the sound of distant horns. "I have seen clans rise through strength and fall through blindness. Tonight, I choose to see clearly." He placed his staff beside Ironwill, creating a cross of old authority and new understanding. Let it be recorded that on this winter solstice, Clan Borvik chose wisdom over fear, growth over stagnation, unity over division. One by one, members stepped forward to lay their own tokens beside the fire weapons, tools, precious objects, each one a symbol of choosing connection over conflict. Nils the Lame hobbled forward to place his calculating stones next to Alfhild's tablets. Ingrid's soft voice, her stutter forgotten in the moment's importance, added her weather-reading crystals. Even some of Gunnar's supporters began to cross the circle, their faces showing the struggle between old loyalties and new understanding. Gunnar himself stood alone now, his hand still on his sword, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "You choose weakness in the face of enemies," he snarled. "When Eric's warriors come ashore, when his ships burn our homes and take our people as slaves, remember that you had the chance to remain strong." But his words had lost their power to persuade. The clan had seen too much, learned too much, grown too much to be pulled back by fear alone. Stig retrieved Ironwill and faced the fjord, where torch-lit ships were becoming visible through the winter darkness. Eric comes expecting to find a clan weakened by change. Instead, he will discover what we have become: stronger because we are united, wiser because we value all forms of strength, more dangerous because we fight not just for survival, but for something worth preserving. The battle that followed was brief but decisive. Eric's raiders, expecting easy victory over a clan they believed had gone soft, instead encountered coordinated resistance unlike anything they had faced. Nils's mathematical mind had calculated optimal defensive positions. Ingrid's weather knowledge had predicted the wind shifts that allowed Borvik's archers perfect shots. Old Henrik's geographical expertise had identified the hidden channels that let their warriors flank the attackers from unexpected angles. But it was Alfhild, heavy with child but fierce with purpose, who delivered the decisive moment. As Eric himself strode up the beach, confident in his traditional understanding of strength, she stepped into his path, carrying nothing but her voice and her unwavering conviction. "You come to destroy what you fear," she called out, her words carrying across the battlefield with surprising power. "But fear makes you blind. Look around you, see how strength and wisdom combined make us unconquerable." Eric laughed, but the sound was hollow, forced. He had expected to find a divided clan ripe for conquest. Instead, he faced unified resistance that used every form of strength available: physical courage, strategic intelligence, technological innovation, and the unshakable unity that comes from people fighting for shared values rather than mere survival. The victory, when it came, was complete but not cruel. Following the new wisdom they had embraced, Clan Borvik offered Eric's defeated warriors a choice: return to their ships and spread word of what they had witnessed, or stay and learn what it meant to belong to a clan that valued all forms of contribution. Many chose to stay. As spring returned to the fjord and Alfhild's time approached, the transformation of Clan Borvik became evident in countless small ways. Children learned not just weapon skills, but also crafts, languages, and the art of seeing worth in unexpected places. Warriors practiced not only battle techniques, but also the harder discipline of knowing when not to fight. Women took roles in council decisions, their voices valued for the different perspectives they brought to questions of survival and prosperity. The birth itself came as the ice broke up on the fjord, as if the world itself was celebrating new beginnings. Alfhild laboured through one night and into the dawn, supported not just by Greta Ironteeth, but by a circle of women who had learned to value each other's strengths. When the child finally emerged, a healthy daughter with her father's strong hands and her mother's wise eyes, the cry that announced her arrival seemed to echo with promise. They named her Astrid Truthseer, and as Stig held his daughter for the first time, his massive hands gentle around her tiny form, everyone present understood that they were witnessing the birth of more than just a child. They were seeing the first member of a generation that would grow up knowing that strength had many faces, that worth had many forms, that the greatest victory was not in defeating enemies, but in building something worthy of protection. Years later, when travelling storytellers spread tales of Clan Borvik across the northern lands, they would speak not just of Stig Wolfmane's prowess in battle, but of the transformation he and his wise wife had brought to their people. They would tell of the clan that learned to see strength in gentleness, wisdom in questions, power in the courage to change. But perhaps the most important part of their story was how it began with a moment when someone chose compassion over cruelty, understanding over assumption, love over fear. In that choice, they discovered that the greatest strength of all was the courage to see people not as they appeared to be, but as they truly were. The mocking circle of ancient stones still stood at the heart of their village, but it had been transformed into something new, a place where truth was spoken, worth was recognized, and the forgotten were finally seen. And sometimes, on very quiet nights, the wind through those stones sounded almost like laughter. The joyful laughter of people who had learned that their deepest strength lay not in what they could destroy, but in what they could create together.